Good morning and welcome to this webinar, Getting on Track, Rail and Energy Efficient Solutions for the EU Green Deal. It's brought to you by UNIFE, the European Rail Industry Association. My name is Kevin Smith, Editor-in-Chief of International Railway Journal, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today's session features 4 presentations and comes at a crucial time for Europe and the rail sector as European leaders push ahead with the implementation of the European Union's Green Deal, an initiative that it's hoped that rail will play a key part in. As we know, 2021 is Europe's Year of Rail. Today's presenters, who I'll introduce shortly, will discuss the interactions between energy and transport as central pillars of the Green Deal's climate neutrality ambition. It will also explore how rail, through continuous improvements in energy efficiency, play a pivotal role in decarbonising the mobility sector. The webinar is divided into 2 parts, with each featuring 2 presenters who will each provide a 10-minute presentation. There will be opportunity for a question and answer session after each of these parts, and I encourage you to participate. Questions will be accepted via the text portal of the webinar only, and you can see that on the top of your module there's a small icon with a question mark in it. If you could enter your questions, check these out as they come in. More than 200 people have signed up for this session, which is amazing, and fantastic to see such interest in what is a really important topic for Europe and the European rail industry. Today's first speaker is Andreas Uttersteller, who's a transport and environment expert at the European Environment Agency. He'll be followed by Jakob Dalunde, a Swedish Green Party member of the European Parliament and a member of the EU's Transport and Tourism Committee. We will then break into a first Q&A session. So as I said before, I invite you to ask questions, and that will last for around 10 minutes or so. And then we'll follow with the final 2 speakers, beginning with Mr. Richard French, who's Shift to Rail Program Manager, Cross-Cutting Activities Coordinator for Alstom, formerly Bombardier Transportation. And last but not least, you'll hear from Mrs. Isabel van Doorn, Acting Head of Unit Sustainable Intelligent Transport at DG Move, the European Commission. But first of all, I would like to introduce Mr. Philip Citron, Director General of UNIFE, to speak, and he will introduce the first session and the topics we want to talk to about today. So, Philip, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for being with us, and allow me to warmly welcome and thank our moderator for today, and especially our keynote speakers. We have an impressive and diverse portfolio of speakers for one topic, which is of crucial importance for rail and which entails both challenges and tremendous opportunities. How synergies between transport and energy can set both sectors on a decarbonization path. How the decarbonization of both energy and transport is essential to achieve the Green Deal's climate ambition. How rail can play a pivotal role in building such cross-sectoral links, helping both sectors to progressively become climate neutral. It goes without saying that when we talk about climate neutrality, both energy and transport sector are the elephants in the room. Energy production and transport are the first and second most polluting sectors in terms of greenhouse gas emissions in the EU. Therefore, any climate master plan, such like the one set through the Green Deal, requires decarbonization in both sectors together. In this regard, the EU transport policy must also be necessary an energy policy. This is unambiguously enshrined in the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy of Commissioner Vălean. It is in this context that rail stands out. Rail is the only mode of transport which has been steadily reducing its emissions while increasing its energy efficiency. If no Green Deal's objective can be reached without transport and energy decarbonization, then rail offers solutions for setting both sectors on a low to zero emission path. Becoming even more energy efficient represents a key objective for rail, and the supply industry can contribute to it decisively. In order to stay economically competitive and act socially responsible towards the environment, rail must continue increasing its energy efficiency. As rail operates in a very competitive business environment, improvements in energy efficiency or changes in energy costs can have a big impact on profit and competitiveness for our sector and its industry. Research and innovation has had and will continue to have an essential role to play in providing technologies and enabling solutions for energy efficiency improvement. To this extent, the impact of the world of Shift2Rail joint undertaking and the future activities of its successor, Europe's rail joint undertaking, have tremendous significance. And you know that the Commission has just published its single basic ask and has confirmed that it will be a new Shift2Rail 2 called Europe's Joint Rail Undertaking. They are very important innovative streams at the crossroad between energy and rail. Hydrogen will be one of the leading fuels of future mobility patterns. Eventually, smart grids will represent an opportunity to move the energy industry into a new era of reliability and efficiency. And finally, batteries, which can improve dramatically the sustainability of urban transport in, for example, trams. I look forward to excellent contribution from our speakers and to an interesting debate. Without further ado, I will give the floor back to our moderator to kick off with the speeches and presentation. Thank you very much, and I wish you an excellent webinar.
Thank you, Philippe. I think there is an issue of the sound. I think there's an issue of the sound. There were some complaints on the chat. Arta, could you confirm that that's okay, or?
To be okay. Seems to be okay. I think you can start the meeting.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll proceed. So just to begin then, as I mentioned before, today's first speaker is Andreas Untersteller, who's from the European Environment Agency.
So you give the floor to. I think everything is good. So I think that we can start the discussions.
Okay, all right. I'll push on. Sorry, I can just hear two things going in my ear. So Andreas Untersteller is a transport and environment expert at the European Environment Agency, an agency of the European Union, provides independent information on the environment and climate. Mr. Untersteller has led major assessments of the environmental and climate impact of transport. He previously worked for the European Commission's Automotive and Mobility Industries Unit. Andreas, yes, the floor is yours, so please go
ahead. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I am very happy to be here with you all today. I believe the topic is extremely well chosen because it ties in well with recent policy developments and also, of course, with the European Year of Rail. So maybe let's have a look at these recent policy developments. If you could change the slide, please. Thank you. So the main two elements, of course, are the European Green Deal and more recently the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy of the European Commission. The European Green Deal's headline goal for the transport sector is a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and that is with reference to 1990 as the target year. And the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy seeks to translate that overall ambition for the sector into more concrete objectives and into concrete action. For the rail sector, it has a number of quantitative targets. These are to have a doubling of high-speed rail traffic by 2030 and a 50% increase of rail freight traffic by 2030. And then by 2050, a tripling of high-speed rail and 100% increase in rail freight traffic. So you see there's quite a lot of ambition overall in terms of reducing transport's climate impact and quite a lot of ambition for the rail sector in particular. Maybe let's have a look at the climate impacts of transport and the Green Deal ambitions in the next slide. Yeah, so here I've plotted almost 30 years worth of greenhouse gas emissions from transport in the EU 27. So the big blue wedge at the bottom is all domestic transport within the European Union. The orange one on top is international aviation, and the gray one at the very top is international maritime transport. So you see that transport CO2 emissions have moved up relatively constantly from 1990 all the way to 2007, and now seem to have plateaued without any clear indication of them declining already. And now if you look at the little green arrow there on the right bottom side, this is round about where the European Green Deal wants to see the sector by 2050. If you only look at the international intra-EU proportion, if you include everything, the arrow would be a bit higher up. And you see there's a massive ambition. So we have 30 years here for the sector increasing, and we have the next 30 years where we need to see a really strong decline in emissions from transport in order to reach the Green Deal's ambition. And there's a special role for the rail sector foreseen there. Let's look at the next slide, please. So here we look at the transport performance of rail freight on top in blue and passenger transport in green in the EU27 over the same timeline as the previous slide. So here we see a development that is largely flat. So maybe let's not look at the first 5 years or so, because there we have some transformation effects in Central Eastern Europe, but maybe if you look from 1995 to 2018, we're seeing a modest increase in absolute terms of rail freight and of rail passenger transport. However, if we look at the share within the overall transport, freight and passenger transport performance, we are seeing a decline of rail from 15.6% in 1995 to 12.6% in 2018, meaning 3 percentage point drop in the overall modal share of rail freight. And we're seeing a stagnation in the modal share of passenger rail. Important to keep in mind. So we have a modest absolute increase, while the relative importance of rail has stagnated, or in the case of freight, declined somewhat, because other sectors have been growing more strongly in the transport area. Next slide, please. So now this is kind of the second component of efficiency. The first one is transport performance. The second one is energy consumption, because these are the two elements that constitute efficiency at the end of the day. And here we see a decrease in the final energy consumption. So we've got a sort of, since 1995, the final energy consumption of rail has decreased markedly. The blue kind of base at the bottom here is electricity, and the orange one is kind of oil and petroleum products, meaning diesel in the case of rail. It's also a very fine line of renewables and biofuels as a share of liquid transport fuels. So it's important to kind of remember from this slide that we have a more or less constant final energy consumption from electricity, while the one from diesel has dropped quite strongly. And the overall electricity has also dropped strongly over the years. Yeah. Next slide, please. So what does that all mean for energy efficiency after looking at all of these fundamentals? So we've seen that the transport performance of rail increased over the last 25 years, while the energy consumption of rail decreased. So if you want to believe these statistics, energy efficiency must have improved, and it is ultimately the topic of this webinar. We've also seen that energy from diesel decreased strongly, and the energy from electricity remained stable, meaning the share of electricity increased in the rail sector. And electrification is one of the efficiency drivers. That is clear, because electric propulsion is more efficient than propulsion with an internal combustion engine. But electrification is also indirectly driving decarbonization through the greenhouse gas intensity of the EU's electricity mix, which we'll see in the next slide. So here we have 1990 to 2050, and we're just like halfway around 2018 now, of greenhouse gas intensity of electricity generation. So we are starting in 1990 above 500 grams CO2 per kilowatt hours. We've seen a dramatic drop to just about 300 grams currently. There's a further strong decrease projected with a reference to 2030. So this is based on projections by European Union member states that are reported to EEA. So the electricity mix is decarbonizing, and it will continue to do so. And that is a result of the fuel switch in electricity generation, better technology, and the European emissions trading system. Next slide, please. So now I want to give you a very short overview of findings of EEA analysis that is already published or forthcoming. One of the main ones is that the energy and greenhouse gas efficiency, which is ultimately what interests us most, benefits of shifting passenger and freight transport to rail are significant. Then rail is vital for reaching the ambition of the European Green Deal for the transport sector. And as a result of the decarbonization of the EU's electricity mix, the greenhouse gas efficiency benefits of rail will further increase. And at the same time, the greenhouse gas efficiency gains from within the rail sector remain important, especially where electrification is not viable. And I think this is really what we want to discuss today. Next slide, please. What is always important to us at EEA is also kind of the data that I mentioned, the methodological dimension of measuring environmental impacts. And here we would welcome to see a more regular monitoring and reporting of the environmental performance of rail, because that would help support policy development even better than what we currently have. In that context, better EU rail statistics would be desirable, especially for rail passenger traffic between different origin-destination pairs. Here we have really good statistics on aviation. The ones for rail are unfortunately not of the same quality, at least the publicly available European ones. Also, full life cycle analysis, especially the inclusion of infrastructure and vehicles, would help a balanced comparison across modes, and would also maybe help to address some of the arguments in favor of other modes that are mostly related to a life cycle perspective and to an infrastructure perspective. Finally, a standardized way of measuring and comparing the environmental performance of different transport modes would be an important step forward. And I think the rail sector has a lot to gain when it contributes to the development of such a methodology, because I think ultimately rail would look pretty good. Last slide, please. So here, maybe a short advertisement for our forthcoming publications. So we are having two publications coming up. One is our Transport and Environment report, which will deal with the question train or plane, comparing passenger travel on these transport modes. The second one is a briefing on the greenhouse gas efficiency of transport modes, which is very close to the topic of today's event. And both will be published as a bundle in the middle of March. So if you want to make sure you don't miss them and you stay abreast with the recent developments of EEA work, please go to eea.europa.eu. There you can follow us on social media. You can sign up to our newsletters if you want, and you won't miss these developments. With that, I would like to conclude and hand the floor back to Kevin.
Thank you, Andreas. Thanks for that. Really appreciate your presentation. We'll come back to you for the Q&A session at the end of Jakob's presentation. So yeah, just to introduce Jakob, he is a member of the European Parliament for the Swedish Green Party since February 2020, having also served in the European Parliament from 2016 to 2019. Jakob is a member of the Transport and Tourism Committee and a substitute member of the Committee of Industry, Research and Energy. He is also part of the delegations to India and Palestine. In his extensive political career, Jakob was a member of the Swedish Parliament from 2014 to 2016, where he's a member of the Defence Committee. He also served as a Stockholm City Council member and has worked at the Swedish Association of Graduate Engineers, been a programme director for digital policy at the think tank Fores, and did his military service as a firefighter. Jakob is a long-time champion for combating climate change, so it's great to receive his input into this session. And he is also an advocate of opportunities to travel by train through Europe and also the situation in the Middle East. Jakob, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that very kind and long introduction. To get to the point, the European Green Deal and related mobility strategy were long overdue initiatives, but they also present great opportunities on how we can green the European transport sector. And with the European Year of Rail, we have the opportunity to reinvent European transport. And with the disruptions of aviation due to COVID, while of course they present significant social challenges that we must handle in a proper manner, they also provide an opportunity to further shift the modes of transportation away from aviation and more to sustainable modes of transportation such as rail. And the energy transport link will be essential in making that happen. And fundamentally, we need to internalize all the external costs. Fundamentally, we need to internalize all the external costs of other modes of transportation and increase the competitiveness of rail. We need to move away from inherently inefficient modes of transportation when it comes to energy and climate to inherently efficient modes of transportation. And several upcoming initiatives will be important in achieving that. One of them is integrating maritime transport in ETS. Another one is properly integrating aviation into the ETS in a way that is actually ambitious, and also revising the Energy Taxation Directive. If rail is to compete with aviation for international travel, we need to level the playing field. For an example, airlines received some 32 million tons of free allowances in 2019, amounting to a subsidy of around 810 million euros, and that's only counting intra-EU flights. Billions of euros in revenue from the ETS could fund the development of new technologies and fuels in aviation, plus contributing to more travel and investment in rail. And the Energy Taxation Directive, the kerosene tax exemption of airlines amount to some 27 billion euros in 2019. And in a leaked Commission study from 2018, shows that even with a kerosene tax on that level, flights would decrease only with 11% with no jobs lost. And these increased funds allows us to boost railways in more direct ways. We can, of course, support the investments in infrastructure, both on a smaller scale in supporting the small scale investments in missing links, but also bigger projects such as the Fehmarn Belt connection, which will, from a Scandinavian perspective, will be a paradigm shift in supporting the mode of shift of transport to railway for both passengers and goods. But there are some other things that we need to do outside of infrastructure investments. With rolling stock, we need to move to a more standardized model. Tailor-made rolling stock is expensive and creates interoperability issues. The market for rolling stock should become more like aviation, with off-the-shelf solutions that are usable everywhere in Europe. And here, the European Union political level needs to do more to provide an opportunity for more standardized rolling stock in terms of allowances and regulation. And standardization requires regulatory stability, long-term thinking from policymakers, including strengthening the European Railway Agency's role as a system authority, maintaining the big European point of view. We need to get the European Railway Agency a proper budget and the authority to properly regulate and implement, for example, also EITMS. And on night trains, this provides a specific challenge. In order to spur competition and make it easier for smaller companies to enter the market, we need to make it easier for them to acquire rolling stock in an appropriate manner. And because the challenge is that when I'm talking to manufacturers of rolling stock, they only make it feasible to invest in new designs for rolling stock if they have a large-scale order from an operator. And this makes it more difficult for smaller operators to purchase smaller amounts of rolling stock. And here I think that the European level should look into pooling and leasing of rolling stock, that smaller operators can lease for a shorter amount of time and decrease the risk of investment in rolling stock for night trains specifically. And with regards to TEN-T, the European Court of Auditors has pointed out that the core network won't be functional by 2030. 6 out of 8 large essential infrastructure projects won't be operational by 2030. And here we need to move more funding to railway infrastructure in general, but also more specifically to the European level, and provide some leverage to make sure that projects are actually funded together with the national level. And here we need a more prominent role for the European level. And on road transport, the mobility strategy targets of 30 million zero-emission cars and 80,000 zero-emission lorries by 2030, and for nearly all road vehicles to be zero-emission by 2050 is not enough. And here we really need to increase our ambitions. We right now have a moment of opportunity. The question is, will we seize it? And I will do my utmost to make sure that we bring the proper mechanisms and investments and regulations to make sure that railway has a renaissance in this decade. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jakob. Really interesting presentation, and you made some really valid and key points there. Yeah, that was very insightful. So I will invite Andreas back into the conversation. Just so we have a Q&A. I believe Philippe had a question just to kick things off. If Philippe could rejoin, if that's possible.
On my side, I would like to thank Andreas and Mr. De Lunde for the both presentation. I think I fully agree with what you said. It's that we are now getting, thanks to the European Year of Rail, at the heart of the debate, and the Green Deal, which has been launched by the Commission at that last year, is absolutely essential, because we have really an opportunity for the rail sector to show that we are at the heart of the decarbonization. But we also need to, if we want to compete against the other sectors who are really getting a lot of political support, and you have mentioned the aviation, we really need to show that our sectors can bring innovation. That's why we were very happy that the Commission has published a list of public-private partnerships yesterday, and that we have one for Europe as Rail. But I think the challenges for our sector are extremely important if we want to show that we are a sector which continues to evolve in the right direction. And I also took note of what you said concerning the new entrants, the fact that there is issues concerning the rolling stock. But as we are really in this decarbonization policy, the sector who is showing that we are the best, we have to continue to show the best, because what we saw in the figures given by the European Environment Agency is that the market share for passengers and freight continues to be extremely low. And if we want to reach the targets which are in the mobility document, which was published by Madame Valéan, we need to make huge efforts, and I think we need to have priorities, and one of the priorities to be sure that the TEN-T corridors will one day become real corridors where there will be a real interoperability. So I would like to thank the both speakers for their very important, interesting message that they are passing to the rail industry.
Thanks for that, Philippe. I have a general question just for Andreas. You mentioned at the end of your presentation just about better improvements or measures of standardization of emissions and other items in Europe. Do you have any preferred methods for that technique, or are there any things that are out there that we might be able to use to improve that measurement?
Yeah, great question, of course. In terms of method, as mentioned, full life cycle analysis would of course be sort of the holy grail of kind of comparative transport assessment. Even so, that's quite tricky. We've seen quite some progress at the level of individual countries in doing that, but offering that for the European level is quite difficult. So that's with our forthcoming report, we limited ourselves to a full well-to-wheel analysis, meaning all the way kind of from energy kind of extraction, supply, to finally the use of the energy in the vehicle, and that's what we're looking at. I would also like to remind that this is not just about greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, at the European Environment Agency, we are first and foremost interested in reducing the overall environmental pressures from the mobility system. So we also need to look at the impact on air quality, for example. We also need to look at health issues from noise. So we would like to see the full spectrum of potential impacts covered there, and getting better data on all modes, including on rail, would certainly help us make the case for modal shift and for sustainable transport in general.
Sure, absolutely. Okay. I've just another question as well for Jakob from my side. You mentioned about more of a standardized model for rolling stock and increased modularity in production. Speaking to rolling stock manufacturers as we do for IRJ, this has been an objective and an initiative that they've been trying to follow for the last few years. What, in your view, is stopping that from happening more often? Is it more, do you need more concessions from the manufacturers, or is it in fact the procurement authorities, the leasing companies, the railways that need to be thinking more down these lines?
I think it's the challenges that we face is a function of railway being mainly thought of as a regional and national mode of transportation. Of course, it's a little bit different for goods shipping, but for passenger transport, most railway companies perceive themselves as a regional or national mode of transportation. And if we are to meet our Paris obligation, more of the medium and longer distance travel for passengers cross-border will need to be done by train. And here we need to realize that we need to move some of the decision-making logic, both of regulations, market mechanism, access charges to tracks. Investments need to move to the European level. And I think that we need to boost the European Railway Agency and give that authority more budget to have leverage to increase their authority and manpower for them to handle more of the regulatory aspects of deciding which rolling stock can be allowed on the tracks. And this will provide better opportunities for the operators to be able to purchase rolling stock that can be run on more track in more countries. So I think it's a big challenge that has to start with stopping perceiving railways as a national matter, more of a European matter.
Okay, that's great. I'll take a couple of questions from the floor, from the channel, and I do encourage people to write your questions in there. We've got one from Henry Volker of Alstom. He asked, what is or should be the answer of rail to every other transport mode going towards zero emissions? Should we be recharging with green energy? And I guess from what Henry's saying, does rail lose its advantage in the electrified area as other modes of transport such as road increase their electrification? And what should rail really do to try and maintain that lead? If Andreas, if you wanted to answer that one, perhaps, or your microphone, you're on mute there.
Maybe I can at least try to answer a part of that question, and that is the one after if the relative advantage of rail will somehow be eroded if other modes of transport electrify. I mean, there is of course a tendency for road transport to electrify at the moment, which is kind of picking up speed. At the same time, I think when we're looking at the overall impact of road transport, also when it comes to other cost categories such as congestion costs and accidents and so on, which would be part of an environmental cost assessment, for example, then there's still kind of very significant disadvantages compared to rail transport. For road transport, also one of the challenges there is vehicle occupancy simply. Even if you're in an electric vehicle and you're driving alone or with an average of, 1.6 passengers, you're still very far away from the greenhouse gas performance of a well-occupied train, for example. So there are a couple of obstacles here. But of course, we welcome the electrification of road transport and should make even more effort to progress here as is part of the Green Deal and the sustainable mobility communication. So I don't see it really as a competition of modes. I think it's a joint effort of the mobility system to become more sustainable, and an increasing share of rail, especially of rail freight, also is essential to reaching that ambition.
Sure. I think that what your answer there ties into another question that we've received, which mentions how rail can better tell the general public and inform the general public of its green credentials. That's always a challenge for the rail sector. It's not always everyone's first choice to use a train over a car, but rail obviously has this green advantage. So how do we better sell the sustainability credentials of rail to the public and help them to embrace this modal shift that we're talking about here and we want to encourage as a sector? And maybe Jakob, maybe you could go first on that, please.
Well, obviously, the railway sector can do a better job of promoting themselves as the green alternative, but I actually do believe that we're already quite there in many ways. The problem, however, is that many people who would like to choose the railway, but for some other reasons, often economical, choose another way because railways sometimes are more expensive, especially for a longer distance. If I take from the Stockholm perspective, where I am from, it can often be as cheap as 30 or 40 or 50 euros to take a flight to most major European cities, while going with the railway all that distance might cost 10 times as much. And here we cannot rely on people to only use morals but ignore their wallet. Then the green sector will only be something for the upper middle class, and we will ignore people who can't afford to go green. Here is why we need to internalize all the external costs of aviation and road transport to move away from inherently inefficient modes of transportation to inherently efficient. Because even if all our cars are electric, and even if we move to hydrogen for aviation in a couple of decades, they still will be inherently inefficient modes of transportation for many distances in Europe. So here, I think that we need to make sure that aviation pays for its climate impact, but we also need to remove all the hidden subsidies for aviation and instead support the inherently sustainable and efficient mode of transportation.
Absolutely. Andreas, do you have any thoughts on that question? Which was from Lucy Anderson, by the way, from the UIC. I should credit her with that question.
I don't have anything to add to that. I think that was well addressed by Jakob.
Okay. I think we'll leave it there for this part of the session, and we'll move on to our next two presenters, which begins with Richard French, who is the Shift2Rail Program Manager at Alstom, formerly Bombardier, and it comes on a key day for Shift2Rail, which has been approved for its second stage today, which will be known as Europe Rail. And Richard is based in Derby, the UK, formerly of Alstom now, formerly Bombardier, and he's responsible for the application, coordination and execution of Shift2Rail projects, including in rolling stock, signalling and locomotives. He's also a member of UK Rail Research Innovation Network's steering committee. Richard, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. As mentioned, I am the Shift2Rail cross-cutting area coordinator and have worked on the Shift2Rail programme for several years. Energy is one of the work areas, and there have now been several projects related to the topic. Maybe we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the rail sector has always been considered as one of the cleanest modes of transport, but can further contribute to achieving the targets for reduction in greenhouse gases and improve energy efficient in several ways, such as increasing energy efficiency of the rolling stock and reducing losses on the infrastructure, increasing energy efficient operations such as driver assistance systems, increasing the capacity and utilisation of passenger and of course freight trains, increasing usage of renewable energy resources, and increasing the percentage of railway traffic by improving the performance and attractiveness of railway transport. The rail industry is developing the technologies to improve the energy efficiency of the sector, and I'm going to describe some of the projects and initial findings regarding the developments being undertaken in Shift2Rail. Also, I will look at some of the aspirations for future work that can be undertaken over the next years to further reduce energy use and achieve carbon-free mobility. As mentioned, energy is one of the work areas in CCA. Being a cross-cutting activity, the focus is on providing support to the programme and ensure a consistent approach from developing standard methods and processes to supporting projects and reporting the effects of the energy saving technologies that are under development. You can move to the next slide, please. To deliver this, the energy work area specific objectives are to develop a methodology to estimate energy consumption by simulation and measurement, enabling standardised specification of energy efficient railway systems, to demonstrate the cost effectiveness of energy saving features and assess the overall energy reduction from the Shift2Rail activities, to stimulate the emergence of standards and pave the way towards a European shared understanding of energy figures in rail, and to link energy and sustainability actions with existing initiatives outside Shift2Rail in order to align understanding and positions from railways and energy stakeholders. If you can move on to the next slide, please. The work to date has been undertaken in the Menders project FINE1 and 2 and the Open Core OPIUS. The OPIUS project developed and validated a simulation tool, methodology and tool to calculate, assess and optimise the energy consumption of rail vehicles and their components. The tool can assess the energy use of introducing innovations in rolling stock and perform simulations with the future technologies. The resulting energy consumption are reference values from the energy baseline to derive the savings related to the future technology and show the benefits of solutions being developed. The FINE1 project used this information and developed the energy baseline as a reference for the analysis of the energy savings from the new technologies and service profiles for high-speed regional, urban and freight traffic. Line parameters such as timetables, gradients and speed limits were included for the segment, together with the definition of reference simulation data consisting of vehicle line and traction component parameters. The work from these projects has resulted in the first energy KPIs to show the potential energy saving opportunities. To date, the information is mostly related to rolling stock, where the major improvements have been through traction, reducing weight, driver assistance systems and smart power supply. The benefits have been integrated for each sector, and the resulting energy savings being up to 3 to 4% for intercity and freight and up to 9% for regional trains. The following are the main developments which are showing the impact so far. And if we move on to the next slide, please. So for traction, silicon carbide converters allow a higher switching frequency and cause lower losses within the propulsion system. Due to the higher switching frequency, the harmonics of the input and output currents are reduced, which leads to lower losses from the motor, inductor and transformer. In addition, silicon carbide converters have a lower weight that further reduces the energy use, and in AC traction systems, a series connections of line and motor converters leverage additional energy reductions. This secondary effect leads to a significant increase in the overall traction chain efficiency and a positive effect on the life cycle costs by decreasing traction energy demand and increasing the amount of recuperated brake energy. There are also other weight-saving initiatives, such as composite car body components, including a high-speed vehicle car body, headstock assemblies, coupler, short coupler end modules, and lighter running gear frames and components. In the energy analysis, the decrease of mechanical brake energy and respectively brake wear is higher than the relative mass reduction. This shows that the mass reductions not only save traction energy, but also produce life cycle cost savings by decreasing usage of mechanical brakes. There is much work being undertaken on alternative traction. In the future, diesel engines can be substituted by hybrid drives powered by diesel and batteries. This reduces the energy consumption, carbon dioxide impact and noise. If the non-electrified part of the line is relatively short, electrical trains with pantographs and batteries can be used. However, this does require charging stations or discontinuous overhead lines for charging the batteries. Also, electrical freight locomotives are used for most of the freight traffic. However, for some depots, the last mile is not electrified. This currently requires a diesel locomotive and effort to change the locomotive. In the future, mainline locomotives can be equipped with batteries for a last mile traction. The effect on the energy is quite low, but the process time and effort is much reduced. Clearly, there is also much work on hydrogen fuel cells, with successful trials being undertaken. Although these projects haven't been done within Shift2Rail, there have been studies undertaken for the implementation in the different operations, and clearly this is an area where further development and deployment is being undertaken. For air conditioning systems, the constant speed compressors and condenser fans can be replaced by digital scroll compressors with speed regulated condenser fans, which reduce energy use and noise. Also, the use of natural gases will reduce the climatic impact. The study on driver assistance systems, driving strategies and related energy management shows a high potential to reduce energy demand on the train level for all sectors. Because the solution is mainly a software-based management system, there's relatively low effort to achieve these results. Finally, the assessment of smart power supply showed that in single-side fed AC power systems, the prevention of neutral sections has a potential to reduce energy demand on the rail level. However, losses in substations due to additional power electronic components needs to be considered as well, and evaluation is ongoing for the overall influence on the energy demand. So moving to the final slide, there are further aspirations for the future, clearly, which is generally aimed at a wider system view. Energy use could be optimised through dynamic management of the complete system, which could forecast and prioritise the energy availability from subsystems and requirements from operators, also enabling transmission of energy between modes. Connected driver advisory systems and energy management systems can be developed where using real-time data, vehicles and infrastructure know their status and operational profile and forecast and optimise energy consumption and regeneration opportunities. Energy consumption of rail vehicles could be further reduced by improving their efficiency and reducing the need for power supply infrastructure. Diesel engines will be replaced by alternative low carbon engine technologies to enable more efficient and decarbonised independently powered vehicles. The focus is on further development of hydrogen fuel cells and storage systems for all sectors, multiple units, shunters and mainline locomotives, and next generation onboard energy storage integrating new technology storage elements. The digital energy twin of the infrastructure system integrates models of alternative propulsion system and electrification, enabling solutions to be identified considering propulsion, energy recovery, smart infrastructure and geographical aspects to determine cost-effective optimum energy use and reduction of emissions at the system level. For the infrastructure, integration and implementation of smart grids, substations and overhead lines that manage energy flows and interface with traction power systems, addressing interfaces with new equipment, electromagnetic compatibility, distributed generation, cybersecurity and data exchange. Finally, there is further development that can be undertaken on systems, especially running gear, structural components, mechanical systems, leading to airless train concepts and using innovative development and validation methodologies. So this is an area where over recent years there has been a focus on the development and more standards, tools and processes and the efficiency of systems, but there is much more that can be undertaken, especially at the system level, to make this sector even more attractive with a very clear focus on deployment. I hope this has given you an overview of some of the developments, and if you're interested in the topics, there is much more information on the Shift2Rail website where all the projects have the deliverables available. Okay, thank you. That was a very quick run through.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, you covered a lot of ground there in quite a short period of time. Appreciate that. Okay, so then to move on to our next and final speaker, it's Isabel van Doorn, who's been a civil servant at the European Commission since 2001. She is currently acting head of the Sustainable and Intelligent Transport Unit at DG Move. Previously, Isabel developed EU policies and regulations in the areas of intelligent transport systems, railways and telecoms, and with digitalisation projects in the field of EU taxation. Before that, she's also worked for Belgian Railways. So Isabel, yes, the floor is yours.
Yes, and I'm now unmuted. Thank you. So I apologize, I was not there from the beginning, so I apologize to other speakers. So now I will try to give some, let's say, to remind everybody about our strategy and what we do in particular in alternative fuels and in the infrastructure for alternative fuels. If we go to the next slide. So in December we have the new strategy adopted, setting the vision for the future of the European transport and mobility. And we know that by far the most serious challenge facing the transport sector is to significantly reduce its emission and become more sustainable. But we all know also that a transformation can offer opportunities for better quality of life for the industry, improving value chain, modernizing, but also pursue global leadership. So for us, there is kind of motto, which is greening mobility must be the new license for the transport sector to grow. We also know that it's not only about greening, it's about also digitalization, because it is also a driver for the modernization of the entire system. So we know also that, and in particular with the crisis we have now, that we need that we should not leave anybody behind. So we need to have mobility available and affordable to all, including in rural and remote region. So our strategy set out a roadmap to have Europe transport firmly on the right track for sustainable and smart future. To have this vision a reality, the strategy identifies 10 flagships, 10 flagship area with an action plan with 82 actions. So yes, we are quite ambitious. So the actions are around these 10 flagship, and we have a key milestone. And basically, we have scenarios underpinning the strategy, and the point is that we need to make sure that we can deliver a 90% reduction in transport sector's emission by 2050. Next slide, please. So you see in front of you the milestones we have by 2030 and 2035. So you see that we need to achieve a lot, and these milestones are quite ambitious because, for example, we need to double the high-speed rail traffic. Rail freight traffic should increase by 50%. So you see that we have a lot of ambitious milestones. Next slide, please. And our goal, of course, is that we can reach our 2050 targets, which are also ambitious. So to do that, we have, as I said, our action. And if you go to the next slide, you will see that we have, and I will focus only on the sustainable part of the strategy. Again, I said that we need the Green Deal has called for a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emission from transport to become a climate neutral economy by 2050. So we need to make all transport mode more sustainable, all transport mode and indispensable for our transport system. So we need to make sure that they are all sustainable. We need to make sure that sustainable alternatives are widely available in a multimodal transport system. So you will have seen that the strategy recall the principle of modal shift and of a multimodal system. And it is not only a question of technological solution. We need to have the conditions for higher uptake of the sustainable modes of transport. And as it was already, let's say, highlighted in the previous speaker, we need to have the right incentive to drive the transition. So we have three pillars of our future action. We need to use all policy levers, measure to significantly reduce the current dependence on fossil fuel. We need decisive action to shift activities towards more sustainable transport mode, notably increasing the number of passengers traveling by rail and commuting by public transport and active mode, as well as shifting a substantial amount of freight onto rail, inland waterways and short sea shipping. And indeed, we need to work on the internalization of external costs. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, the strategy set out an action plan of concrete policy measures for achieving the sustainable objective. We have 5 flagship, and you can read them on the slide. But maybe you know them already. I will focus maybe on one action or two on flagship 1. Next slide, please. So on that slide, you see under flagship 1, boosting uptake of zero-emission vehicle, renewable and low-carbon fuels and related infrastructure. There is one action which is related to the revision of the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive. You see that we will address minimum infrastructure needs in all modes of transport. We are currently considering options for more binding targets on the rollout of infrastructure, because you remember that this directive is an infrastructure directive, and we will try also to consider options to have measures to ensure full interoperability of the infrastructure and use service for all alternatively fueled vehicle. So we need to have a detailed assessment of needs. And we are doing it right now in the impact assessment accompanying the revision. And we know also that following the open public consultation, that we need to look at the adequate information for consumer so that we have a better transparency on pricing, facilitating seamless cross-border payment. These activities are more related to the road transport. Next slide, please. In terms of state of play, so this initiative is part of the Fit for 55 package, and so currently scheduled for June 2021. As we had the open public consultation last year, we are currently working on our impact assessment. We still have a few weeks to be able to go to the internal board looking at the impact assessment, so that we believe that we are still on track to meet this internal deadline to be on time for the package of June 2021. In the meantime, we are finalizing our Commission report on the implementation of the directive, and I hope that it can be, but I am quite confident that it can be adopted before the end of the first quarter, so before the end of March. Next slide, please. Then we have in the strategy another initiative, which is the strategic rollout plan. So we have to publish a strategic rollout plan outlining what are the actions that we need to support the rapid deployment of alternative fuels infrastructure. We will develop it, or we are developing it with the STF, so the Sustainable Transport Forum, bringing together different representatives of the entire value chain. And our objective is to roll out a dense, widely spread network ensuring easy access for all consumers, and including the operators of the heavy-duty vehicles. So again, the focus is road, but not only. Next slide, please. This is the end of my presentation.
That's great. Thank you, Isabelle. Really appreciate that. Okay, so then we move on to our final Q&A session. So I'll keep Isabelle and Richard there, and perhaps Andreas and Jakob might come in a bit later as well. So just to start off, to speak to you, Isabelle, there about your plans and policies. Has the COVID-19 pandemic fed into your thinking here in relation to energy and the future policies guiding Europe? And obviously we saw a huge decline in use of transport in the last year or so. And how do you see this playing out in the future, and how might this impact your policy and thoughts for this document as you put it together?
So I guess that it is addressed to me. So basically, you know that the Commission has tried, and not only the Commission, but the EU leaders, they have tried to see what are the means they can put on the table to help the transport sector and the sectors as a whole to recover. And if I may mention the recovery, the RRF and RRP. So clearly the national recovery plans should be used to help the sector. So we have provided some guidance, and we start to receive the first draft plans from member states. And indeed, we need to see how member states use this opportunity, because that's the first opportunity to recover. But basically it is a national plan, and so if you need to use this kind of budget, you need to go to your national leaders to make sure that your project can be included. And then of course we have our different funding and financing instruments. You know, we hope that we will soon receive the green light for using our instrument like the CEF to launch our calls and to help the sector to propose a good project so that we can move on.
Okay. And just to follow up, there's a question on the chat from Pauline Sau, who asks, will rail decarbonisation specifically be addressed in the upcoming revision of the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive?
As I said, yes, so we need to include the different modes in the review, and so rail is included in the review indeed. But as I said earlier, the focus will be on the infrastructure. And you remember or not that the alternative fuels work a lot with the member states, and with the member states have the duty to provide us with a strategy, with their own plan, their national policy framework, as we call them. And then there are some reporting tools that we use. So indeed, we think about it, but basically what will come as a result will come from member states again.
Okay. Then maybe to bring Richard into the conversation, just as you know, as we talk about Shift2Rail, and I know Shift2Rail came up with its catalogue of solutions sort of, in the end of 2019. Are there any specific solutions you see, entering operation and service faster than others as a result of the work that you've overseen in Shift2Rail in this area regarding energy efficiency?
Yeah, well, I think one thing to notice clearly, Shift2Rail is only about halfway through its programme, the first programme, although we're starting to start now to set up the second programme. I think the big advantages that will be coming through are with the hydrogen fuel cell trains that are being trialled at the moment, energy storage trains, which again have been trialled. So there's a big focus now on getting through to deployment. And I think they're sort of the alternative fuels are the areas that make the biggest impact, probably in the shorter term.
Okay. And what do you make in general of progress with alternative fuels, in the European marketplace? Now we've seen examples in Germany, especially of hydrogen pilot projects, and there's also battery train orders which have increased in frequency in sort of recent months and years. Is this something, I don't know, is this encouraging for the sector, or is it, I don't know, just it's just part of what's happening at the moment?
So was that to me?
Yeah. Obviously, Alstom is
definitely
encouraging.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's definitely encouraging. There's a lot of development has been done over the recent years. There's a lot of work that goes into getting to a final trial. The main focus has to be on deployment, receiving orders that are now starting to come through, and obviously going through to the wider application in railways, and the supporting infrastructure needs to come with it. So we're at a transition point, if you like, but certainly, no, absolutely, the signs are good, and it is extremely important, as we know, to decarbonise the railway. It is the solution to remove diesel trains. So yeah, it's good progress, but we need to continue.
Sure. Okay. And I believe Philippe has another question if he wants to rejoin the discussion.
No, in fact, I think that if you want to invest in new technologies, like as you said, Kevin, hydrogen trains, battery trains, and we have to continue electrification, we need to have money for doing that, and we are happy to see that in the first of all, we have the confirmation on Europe's rails yesterday, but still, as it has been said by Isabelle, what is certainly very important is to be sure that in the national recovery plans that the member state of the EU will present to the Commission before the end of the month of April, there will be investment for rail. That's absolutely essential. And from what I hear, there's on the first proposals who've been sent to the Commission for a kind of first assessment. It's a bit disappointing, though. So I take the opportunity, because I know that a lot of people listening to what we say and who are in close contact with the Transport and Finance and Research Ministry, to say that it's the right time to invest and to put the projects dealing with what we said. Because if you want to have a hydrogen trains, if you want to invest in batteries, even if you want to continue the electrification in some parts of Europe, you need to invest, and we have the possibility to put to have quick wins and have investments can be done very quickly. Like, well, it's not linked to energy, but of course the deployment of ERTMS, which is a nice way to have an interoperable system in Europe. So that is the first thing I wanted to say. But we have the tools. There is the political will with the sustainable and smart mobility strategy. So I just wanted to say to Isabelle that there would be an issue, because as the DG Move has worked with the other sectors, I think that we hope that there would be a kind of special treatment for the rail sector, who is really leading the decarbonization process in Europe. So I hope that in the decision which will be taken, when, for example, when you will be awarded the contract for in the framework of CEF, this notion of decarbonization, of green investment, will be part of the tools that you will put on the table when you will take decisions on investments. It's not really a question, but it's a wish, and I'm sure that Isabelle knows what I'm saying, understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's an absolutely valid comment. There's another question from the floor, perhaps relating to what Philippe's saying, but from Eduardo Prieto, asking, should rail take advantage of opportunities generated by the European Emissions Trade Scheme, which is directly funding investments that save CO2 emissions through the Innovation Fund, and he's shared a link there. Maybe to you, Isabelle, is this something that you feel that the rail sector should be looking at, and is it looking at in your experience?
Unfortunately, I am not well aware of the details of this, so I am not able to answer. Okay.
I didn't know whether, just to bring them back into the conversation, of Jakob or Andreas might know about this, and whether there has been any efforts in the rail sector to embrace it.
Yeah, I mean, I also cannot comment specifically on this part of the question on the Innovation Fund and taking advantage of the opportunities there. I mean, I think what's been clear from my presentation is that rail transport is already the transport sector that has the biggest profile in ETS, simply because it has electricity is kind of its main fuel by now. So there is an intricate link with the ETS, and the ETS is one of the driving factors behind the decarbonization of the rail sector going forward. And I think that is something to note in any case, but it doesn't fully answer the question. I understand that.
Okay. That's fine. Okay. I'll maybe a more general question, which is from Roberto Palacin from Newcastle University. We have modal shift as an objective for a while, obviously shifting to rail and increasing rail's modal shares, particularly in freight. But freight share remains low, and I believe it's dropped in the last year, only slightly. Is there a way that we can approach this in a different way? And we've mentioned different policy prescriptives during this discussion, from the EEC and the EU, to try and encourage this modal shift, specifically the SSC, and increasing people on a high-speed rail. How do we make this a reality? Do you have any sort of one or two thoughts on how that might be possible? And again, I'll start with you, Isabelle, if that's okay.
Yes, indeed. And so maybe I would also use my previous experience with railways. So clearly, indeed, we have not managed that yet. And we have different factors. And first, And first, we see that, and maybe I will use buzzword, but I will use them. This user centricity is a buzzword, but we should really have that in mind, and we need to see how it is easy for one person or one package to move. And where there's the first thing, and the second thing, at least for the passengers, but also maybe for the freight, is also a kind of change in behavior. I know that for freight is a bit different, but and we really need to work on it, and so that's why we are trying to do it. That's what we are trying to do it. So we are trying to use the multimodality, and it means that we really need to improve the multimodal hubs, so the terminals in the freight and the stations, airports, and so on and so forth. The hubs that I think that there we can still improve the situation, to improve the experience both for the people and for, let's say, the businessmen. So clearly, in terms of infrastructure, we need to improve that. We need to improve the information, and so there maybe the digitalization is back, and we see from our side that information exchange between the different mode is still can still be improved. And then for the mobility behavior, so we have in the urban world, we have this European Mobility Week, but going beyond, this Mobility Week has been also identified in the Climate Pact, in the EU Climate Pact, as one element, because transport, you know, is identified as one key focus area of the Climate Pact. And you can become ambassador, and I know that some of the rail sector are ambassadors. So what are the actions you could bring to bring to the attention of the people the need to move? So we still have a lot to do in the different let's say layers of activity. So infrastructure layers, digital layers, but also the social and economic layer. So how we can provide incentive, economic one, but also behavioral one. I would stop.
Okay. There's another question on the chat from Ethan Pekin of CER. Ethan asks, internalization of external costs remains an area that's hard to push. The EU has so far failed to address all modes equally. He says that, pointing out the Energy Taxation Directive, ETS, Eurovignette reforms are pending. The mobility strategy includes this in the programme and also mentions labels to trigger behaviour change. This should be harmonised at the EU level and applied to all modes. He asks, what are the panelists' views on this, and how specifically will EEA and DG Move plan to address this? Yeah, maybe Andreas, you could kick off there.
This question is the most important thing, but certainly the most challenging thing of the smart mobility that has been presented by Madame Valéan. But I think from what I understood, there are the ongoing discussion on Eurovignette and even a trilogue. So there's more progress on this, and we count on the support, of course, of the European Parliament to be sure that this topic of internalization of external costs would be one day. There will be progress on this, and I don't know if Darren could say a word on it, because I know that the Tran committee is very active on these topics.
If Jakob is still there.
Well, if not, I think it's a very practical topic, and well, it's something which has to be discussed at the level of the member states and the Commission. But of course, there's been almost no progress in the past 10 years on this topic. I'm sorry to say that to Isabelle, it's a reality.
Yeah.
You should not be sorry.
No,
you should not be sorry, because we know that it is really difficult, that we are trying to change something which which is there for such a long time, that we need to change the mentality. We all need to be convinced that we have to do it, and we need also, it's always also the chicken and an egg, so that if you want to change something, you need to have everything ready. So it's really, it is slow, and we are ambitious. So let's see if we can achieve and we can meet our ambition. Indeed.
Perhaps just to bring Richard back in, but do you see any technological developments potentially speeding up that process and encouraging a greater shift?
Do you mean general shift to rail?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the talk we did this morning was based around energy, but there is a lot of work on modal shift. We touched earlier on digitisation. Certainly on the freight aspect, you were talking about so more information flowing across modal, but also within the rail industry. And there's a whole area of work, and probably more so in the next programme, about communications, digitisation, and information flow. And that'll be one of the large areas of development in both passenger and freight rail going forwards. So yeah, there's a whole different aspect of the work that's ongoing, but absolutely.
Yeah, and I think we do see progress in that area, from UNIFE members outside. The coverage that we do, that the technologies that are being developed are making more of this shift more possible, because it's more feasible to get more trains onto track through enhanced signalling, ECCS, and other areas. We also see, I think, developments among operators themselves. I point to PKP Cargo as an example of a freight operator that's embracing a new strategy to become more of a logistics operator, with a goal of shifting away from coal transport to more intermodal, but being able to facilitate that. And yeah, as well as at the European level, there's certainly developments amongst the operators and the people working within the sector to try and encourage that shift. I know, for example, you look at the European the 2020-30 objectives of the European Rail Freight Association, and all the freight operators coming together there, and rail freight forward. That's the word I'm looking for. Okay, I'll go back to the questions. I think we might have covered everything that was in the chat. So, I didn't know if you had any closing remarks, Philippe, maybe just to round this off, or another.
No, I just wanted to warmly thank, first of all, our moderator for today, and especially our keynote speakers, Madame Van Dorm, member of the European Parliament, Jacob Delunde. We were very impressed by what he said concerning our sector. I'd like to thank as well Richard French, that you know quite well, and thank Andreas Understaller for the very interesting presentation. I think it's been a very interesting debate, which allowed us to touch many different matters. It shows how solid are the sectoral links between rail and energy, and how important it is to achieve our ambitious climate targets. I think this is certainly one of the most important things. Today, we could once again reaffirm that energy is one of the main performance drivers of the rail system, and moreover, is at the heart of the new clean mobility paradigms. We have discussed, and there was a very interesting presentation on the sustainable and smart mobility strategy, which has been adopted by the Commission in December. I think that this strategy sets the pathway we need to pursue. We've discussed and had a very interesting presentation on Shift to Rail 1 and 2. So I think this webinar was very interesting, because it goes it fits perfectly in the debate about the Green Deal, and I think the most important thing is that we know that it is the European Year of Rail. Unfortunately, all the panels are done on a virtual basis. Let's hope that one of them will be on the personal basis, and would be possible to be in the same room to have the discussion. And I would like really to thank Kevin, for the very good moderation he made and for all the good questions. So, and we know that he's always been, as a journalist, very supportive of the rail sector. So thank you to all the participants to this webinar. And as you know, there will be another webinar in March. So thank you to all of you, and I hope you spend a nice day and see you soon on the, I would say, on this screen of Unife. And thank you again for spending 1 hour and a half all of us. And goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you very much.